Good morning. Tonight, President Reagan goes before Congress one more time to appeal for his budget cuts. Now, one area that would be affected is emergency medical care and how federal funds would be given out. Under the Reagan plan, some say the growth of shock trauma units would be stopped, and current units might not get enough money from their states. Well, today we're going to talk about shock trauma. We want to start by showing you an excerpt from a TV7 documentary that was shown just a couple of years ago. It was about Baltimore Shock Trauma Center, reported by Gary Axelson. It's called A Race with Death. We pick up the action as an accident victim is being taken to the unit.
His chances for survival are good. 85% of those who get to shock trauma live. That's twice as many survivors as 10 years ago, before this system existed.
It's been proven over the years that our success rate is good because of the high-speed transportation.
You're the state police helicopter. We're taking you to the hospital in Baltimore.
If the victim is conscious, they're told that they're in a helicopter to please remain still, that we're trying to do everything possible to help them.
Can you hear me, John? Open your eyes for me. John, open your eyes. Open your eyes, John.
We tell them that they're en route to the shock trauma unit to remain still, and we're trying to do the best possible for them. Quite a few of the victims are unconscious, and there's virtually no conversation between us and them. We just try to stabilize them as best as we can in the helicopter for the short flight back into the trauma center. Our program is similar to the MASH unit, which goes out into the field to pick up wounded victims or serious accident victims and transport them to a centrally located hospital.
It's 4:10 and the patient has arrived at the center within the golden hour, but the drama's far from over.
Keep your head down, John.
The next team takes over from where I've left off. The doctors are the one that have the hardest job ahead, and that's the actual life-saving. They're the most important, of course, because they're going to determine if the patient lives or dies.
Accidents are the leading killer of people under 40. That's why the federal government wants systems like this blanketing the country. For the nation, this Maryland unit is a showpiece. For the men and women who work here, it's a nightly race with death.
That was an excerpt from a documentary called A Race with Death, and it was about Baltimore's Shock Trauma Center. We are pleased to welcome now the director of that center, Dr. R Adams Cowley. Welcome to Good Morning Washington. And also Alan Doelp, who is a reporter and who's written a book about shock trauma. Welcome to you also.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Cowley, why don't we start with you and just sort of get a working definition of what shock trauma is and your assessment of how important it is to have these dotting the country, as was the belief a couple of years ago that that was the way to go. What exactly is a shock trauma center and a unit?
A shock trauma center is a unit which has the capability of managing any kind of accidental problem that's brought to it. It has the total capability of providing resuscitation and stabilization. That is, the person's in shock and you get him out of shock. You stabilize him, then he either goes to an operating room or he goes to a critical care unit where he gets sophisticated expert care, and it's the highest in the medical profession.
Your own assessment of how necessary it is, how many of these centers do we need, and should each hospital in a city have shock trauma teams available?
No, you shouldn't have them all over the city. They have to be cost effective. And the second thing is, all hospitals can't afford the sophistication in nursing care and the physician care and the people being there all of the time. And therefore, you designate shock trauma units throughout the area that is cost effective and also geographically effective and also population effective. You need more in one place simply because of population. For example, we have one over on the Eastern Shore. And the major reason for that being there is that we are separated in our state by this huge body of water, the Chesapeake Bay. So it's more cost effective to treat them there than to send them all up to Baltimore.
Mr. Doelp, in your book, you talk about the medical politics of shock trauma centers, particularly the one in Baltimore, and what Dr. Cowley had to go through. Can you just describe for us briefly what happened there and what feelings you came away from about priorities in this country about saving some of these patients?
Well, the issue in Baltimore and the issue today nationwide remains primarily economic. Trauma patients, accident victims, are usually covered by somebody's insurance, and that means that they pay their bills. In fact, that means they pay their bills whether they live or die. And so these patients were very popular with all hospitals, most of whom lose money on their emergency rooms. The idea of centralized trauma care was anathema to the people who run the hospitals and pay the bills and collect the money. My personal opinion is that this was the source of much of the resistance to the centralized trauma care concept that Dr. Cowley introduced in Maryland 20 some odd years ago, and which is now spreading gradually across the country. We still hear, even today, about battles being fought out in the Midwest over people wanting to set up new trauma centers. People say you don't need it. It's over-treatment, it's unnecessary. We can do it just as well as you can, which has been proven to be wrong so many times. At the shock trauma unit in Baltimore, they have an 83% survival rate. I think the national average for similar types of injury would be about 40 or 50%. So there's no question that you can save lives. It's also cost effective to save these lives because trauma affects people under 35 years of age. It's the biggest single killer of people under 35.
Accidents.
It's a young person's disease, yeah, trauma, accidents. These people may have 20 productive years left in their life if you can save them. And they're going to be earning money and paying taxes. Their insurance companies are not going to have to pay off. Social Security is not going to have to support widows and orphans. To the nation as a whole, to the economy as a whole, it's very cost effective to treat these people, even if it costs $20,000 or $30,000 per patient. You're still getting a bargain.
Let me say something first. A lot of people wonder what shock trauma is. It's a combination of two words that we use to describe our program. But what is shock? To us, shock for the layperson is a momentary pause in the act of death. You and I and Alan are going to go into shock one of these days. We're going to experience this phenomenon unless we're blown out of the water or something. And what is trauma? Trauma is a medical name for injury. We all know what injuries are and so forth, and this is the combination of these two problems we treat.
All right. Let's pause on that. We'll continue our conversation in just a moment talking about shock trauma. Stay with us. We're talking about shock trauma this morning, emergency medical treatment at the Baltimore Shock Trauma Center with the director, Dr. R Adams Cowley, and also with Alan Doelp, who's written a book about shock trauma. Of course, it's very much in the news because of the Reagan budget cutting plans and the medical implications. Now, your unit, your center, is funded by the state, so you really aren't dependent on this. Does that say then that what Reagan is proposing might not be such a bad idea?
We're concerned about the Reagan proposal because emergency medicine in this country isn't well enough advanced, and the concept of what we have been talking about, the development of a network of centers like this, just like has been established in Washington, D.C. now, where the president went, these kinds of things will be harder to do if the block grant, those who control the block grants decide that this isn't a priority. They want to pay off their Medicare bills or these kinds of things, and that's what worries us. The second thing is there's millions of dollars that have been spent all over the United States to develop an emergency medical service system, and it's partly put together, and if it isn't continued by some type of categorical grant with an EMS system, all of this money is going to be lost, I'm afraid. The things will cave in because this has been the impetus, money from the federal government to start these programs. What are you starting it for? Trauma is the biggest killer of young people, the flower of our nation. It's the killer where the kid or the man who's got a good, healthy mortgage on his farm, he's got 2 or 3 children, he's got all this, and suddenly he's dead. Or his wife, if she's a breadwinner, she is dead. And all of this is so unnecessary in 80% of the cases. Now, these people earn money. Each one of these lives, according to the Department of Labor statistics, is worth $287,000. So if you just add this amount of money up, only a few 4 or 5 jets would pay for the whole federal system.
Yeah, Mr. Doelp, I know you've done some research along that line, and you say, what, one F-15 would amount to what? One trauma center?
The price of an F-15 would build a pretty good trauma center, a centralized trauma center. It wouldn't support the whole system. See, trauma care is the kind of thing that's tailor-made for federal subsidy, because it's very expensive going in, and it's very cost-effective in the long run. 115,000 people died last year from accidents. That's the National Safety Council's figure. With the proper kind of trauma care, maybe half of those people might not have died if we had a nationwide network of trauma care systems. It's not just Dr. Cowley's unit. It's the helicopters that fly the patients in there in time to save their lives. So you've got to have the entire system working and ready when the accident happens. But it's very expensive. But if 50,000 lives a year could be saved, and if these people have 20 productive years left, and each one of them is worth $287,000, you're talking about tens of billions of dollars going out of the economy every year that might not otherwise be lost. So it's cost effective in the long run to spend the money to save these lives. It makes you wonder where our priorities are.
Right. You know, as you were doing your research for the book and as you interviewed people and got into the whole question of medical politics, you know, where does that really come into play, and what did that mean in real terms? Were people trying to set up their own, their favorite hospitals would get certain funds? What was the practical translation of what you call medical politics?
Well, there's a combination of things. One, doctors work awfully hard and for a very long time to become doctors, and they study very hard, and they're very smart people, and they don't like to be told that they can't do everything that a doctor is supposed to do. And for years we've had the myth that every doctor can treat every disease as well as any other doctor. Well, of course, if that were true, we wouldn't have specialties, and trauma is just as important a specialty as any other. But every surgeon in the country got offended when it was suggested that he couldn't treat trauma as well as anyone else. The fact is that these people treat a lot of it, they get a lot of practice at it, so they're very good at it. That was one thing. The other thing is that if you think about it, hospitals and people who are influential in the medical community, the boards of directors and people like that, they're not people who take the Hippocratic Oath. Doctors take Hippocratic Oaths. Administrators don't. And administrators keep the books and pay the bills and collect the money. And they help make the policies of hospitals. And that might help explain why there was resistance to centralized trauma care, why there still is in most parts of the country. It's a very political thing, and it's at the bottom of it you find economics. Hospitals have to balance their books like anyone else, and they don't want to give up their cash customers.
We need to pay a bill right here, but we'll be back, and we'll be taking your phone calls with Dr. Cowley and with Alan Doelp. Our number is 432-WJLA, 432-9552. The topic is shock trauma. Give us a call. Shock trauma, and let's get back to President Reagan for a moment, because we were talking about that during the break, that in fact they did put you on alert. How does that work, and how do they determine whether or not someone needs to go to a whole shock trauma center, or when it's okay to go to a hospital that just has a shock trauma team?
The Secret Service has visited all of the hospitals in the Washington and Baltimore area, and then they make their selection. Previously, they didn't do that sort of thing. They made all other kinds of arrangements for candidates and so forth, but when you come down to, they never even thought several years ago, well, what happens if somebody gets shot or something? So now they have made all of these arrangements with the various areas, so that for specific kinds of injuries they go to one place or another, or maybe just the nearest one, like President Reagan did.
And so really you say that he wasn't hurt badly enough to need to go to Baltimore. Was that the bottom line?
Strictly speaking, what they want at the shock trauma unit in Baltimore is people with at least 2 injuries, either one of which would kill you if it weren't treated. Multiple life-threatening injury, they call it. President Reagan only had 1 life-threatening injury. He could have been treated equally well at any of Maryland's regional trauma centers. He was treated very, very well at GW. They did everything precisely the same way that it would have been done at one of Maryland's regional trauma units, and obviously he did quite well for it. He also picked the right time to have his incident because it was 1:30 in the afternoon when all the senior people were in the hospital, back from lunch, and available instantly. That's very fortunate for the president. If it had happened at 2 o'clock in the morning, he might not have had access instantly to such talent. But that's the difference between that and a place like Baltimore, where their top talent goes to work on weekends and evenings, because that's when most of the accidents arrive. And very few hospitals put their most experienced people on duty on weekends.
All right. Let's take a phone call. Good morning, Washington. You're on. Do you have a question about shock trauma?
Yes, I do. The question I have is, I realize that, you know, the shock trauma units are very good. My son's life was saved at one. But I was wondering, perhaps Reagan's tax cuts aren't such a bad idea, because a state-funded shock trauma unit would probably be built sooner, and it would be built where the state wanted it without all this extra government regulation that would perhaps take longer to build and make it not as good as it could be and exactly what the state needs. What do you think?
I think one of the difficulties of having it done piecemeal by the states is that you may end up with competing trauma centers. You may end up with trauma centers that are closer to each other than they need to be. I think there has to be some sort of coordination, at least regionally, if not nationally. And if this can be done by cooperating state agencies, that's just as well. But it's the sort of thing, again, I say that the medicine is very, very good, but what makes it work is the system. All the moving parts have to be working well together. And if you have a state line where the policy changes radically from state to state, you're going to have some lapses in the quality of your care. I think that's why coordination on a federal level is probably very important.
Okay. Thank you very much. Oh, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I can't agree more. We have a tremendous system in Maryland, but it took 15 years to build it. It isn't something that just happened or lasts 3 years. Now, with this tremendous system, what do you do when you get out of your state? Do you get the helicopter system? Do you get this communication system? All these things? Why shouldn't everybody everywhere all over the country have this? And I don't think you can do it piecemeal with each state doing their own thing and with their own little fiefdoms and so forth. There's got to be some national coordination like what has been going on in order to see that all of these things are put in place. Once that's done, then it's a very simple matter to turn it back to the states and tell them to run it.
Okay. Thank you for your phone call. And I hope whatever your opinion that you will express it to your representative in Congress, because they will be voting on this package. So however you feel about it, whether you're for it or against it, you ought to let them know. We'll take a phone call. Good morning, Washington. You're on. Hello? Hello, go ahead. Is your television down?
No, I can hear you.
Okay, go ahead.
I just want to say, in November, my brother had an accident, a truck accident. He ran into a utility pole, and he had severe damage to his brainstem, and he broke his jaw in 2 places. And his oxygen had been cut off for a few minutes, and the helicopter from Quantico came and got him. And it took him like less than 7 minutes to get him to Washington Hospital Center. And if it wasn't for that, he'd probably be dead right now. He's still in the hospital, but he's just about ready to get out. And he just turned 18. You know, he's really young. And, you know, I just thank God that there was that to help him. Because, you know, if there wasn't, he wouldn't be here.
And that's the benefit of having a system. Speed is all important. When you're very seriously injured, what's likely to happen is either you're going to suffocate or you're going to bleed to death. And those things happen very rapidly. Transportation, getting you to a place that's qualified to treat you is all important.
Thank you for sharing that story. And I would just point out that in Alan's book there are a lot of stories like that of people who made it because the Shock Trauma Center was there. Thank you so much for calling, and good luck to you and to your brother. We'll take another phone call. Good morning. You're on.
Good morning. I'm a district fireman, and I'm also an emergency medical technician, so I can appreciate the job that the shock trauma centers do in the city, Baltimore, and otherwise. But there's one personal experience problem that I'd like to ask a question about. Why is it that if there is a person who is injured in Maryland, not necessarily in any particular county, is flown automatically to Baltimore, even though the Washington Hospital Center, their trauma unit was much closer. Like I said, this is a personal experience thing. I had a friend of mine shot, and he died about 3 years ago. Now, they flew him from Charles County to Baltimore, although by air miles it was much closer to the hospital center. Is there any particular reason for this?
Dr. Cowley, why does that happen sometimes?
That happens sometimes, and I believe that this gentleman's wrong. For the last 2 years, they've been flying into Prince George's General Hospital for people coming from down that far. And what I would like also to say that the standards in the Maryland system are higher than any place in the country, and we're concerned about our Maryland citizens. There is no question probably this man, if he was had a gunshot wound and he died on the way, he should have gone to another center or a closer center. And this has been taken care of by having this other hospital center designated.
Okay. Well, thank you both, and thank you so much for calling. Dr. Cowley, a pleasure meeting you. I heard so much about you. And thank you, Alan Doelp, for coming. The book is called Shock Trauma. I think you might find it interesting, and also keep in mind about Reagan's budget package and what it might mean to you and our regional shock trauma centers right here. When we come back, we'll tell you all about some community events coming up, and still ahead, we're going to talk about another form of emergency medical care called Urgent that's just opened up in Prince George's County. And Money Week continues as we talk about money market funds. Don't go away.